I never thought I would be sitting here telling this story. 4 years with Stephanie, one of those as her fiancée, and I was certain we would build a life together. When I proposed on that Hawaiian beach, I pictured growing old with her. But after she got that ring, everything changed. The woman I loved started making demands that crossed lines I never thought she would cross. When she threatened to call off our wedding unless I gave in, I realized sometimes the hardest choice is the right one. Let me know where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had to make a difficult choice for your own well-being. I met Stephanie at my college friend Jordan's birthday party 4 years ago. I was 29, then established in my career as a software engineer at a growing tech company in Seattle. My life was comfortable and balanced. I spent weekends hiking the nearby mountains, had a close relationship with my parents who lived just an hour away, and enjoyed gatherings with my tight circle of friends from college. That night at the party, I noticed Stephanie immediately. She had striking blue eyes and an infectious laugh that caught my attention from across the room. Jordan introduced us, mentioning that Stephanie had recently moved to Seattle for a marketing position. We connected instantly over our shared love for travel indie films and trying new restaurants around the city. Our first date was at a small Italian place downtown. We talked for hours, closing down the restaurant. Stephanie was intelligent, ambitious, and seemed genuinely interested in my life. I found myself thinking about her constantly in the days that followed. The early months of our relationship were everything I could have hoped for. We explored the city together, took weekend trips to Portland and Vancouver, and integrated seamlessly into each other's lives. Stephanie charmed my parents when they came to visit, and I got along well with her family when we flew to Chicago to meet them over Thanksgiving. There were small things I noticed, but dismissed. Stephanie would occasionally check my phone while I was in the shower. She would sometimes make comments about female colleagues I mentioned from work. Once she got unusually upset when I went for drinks with Thomas, my best friend since high school, without inviting her along. But these moments seemed insignificant compared to all the good times we shared. By our 1-year anniversary, we had moved in together. Our apartment downtown had a view of the Space Needle, and we spent evenings on our small balcony planning future adventures. Stephanie talked about wanting to visit every continent before turning 35, and I found myself imagining being beside her for all of it. Thomas was the first to say something directly. We were having lunch near my office when he carefully broached the subject. I still remember his exact words. "Clark, I notice you have been canceling on guys' night more often. And the camping trip last month, you were the only one who could not make it. Is everything okay with you and Stephanie?" I brushed it off. "She just likes us spending time together. We are building a life." "You know," Thomas nodded but added, "just make sure you are not losing yourself in the relationship. You have not touched your guitar in months, and you used to play every weekend." I told him he was overreacting and changed the subject, but his words lingered. Still, when Stephanie and I reached our 3rd anniversary, I knew I wanted to marry her. I planned an elaborate proposal during our vacation in Hawaii, getting down on one knee at sunset on Waikiki Beach. The joy on her face when she said yes made any doubts I had vanish. My parents were supportive but cautious when I told them the news. My mother hugged me and said she was happy if I was happy. My father took me aside later and asked if I was sure, mentioning that 3 years was not that long to know someone. I assured him I had never been more certain of anything. Looking back, the shift in Stephanie began almost immediately after the engagement. It was subtle at first, but undeniable. The first time I noticed was when we started discussing wedding dates. What began as collaborative planning quickly became Stephanie dictating decisions. When I suggested a smaller ceremony with just close friends and family, she dismissed the idea without consideration. "Clark, this is going to be the biggest day of our lives," she said firmly. "We cannot cut corners. My parents are expecting something special, and so am I." I told myself this was normal. After all, wedding planning is stressful, and I wanted her to have the day of her dreams. Little did I know this was just the beginning. As our wedding planning progressed, Stephanie's demands grew increasingly unreasonable. The first major issue arose when she insisted I could not invite my cousin Jessica to the wedding. Jessica and I grew up together almost like siblings since our mothers are twins. But Stephanie had always been strangely uncomfortable around her. "I do not want her at our wedding," Clark Stephanie stated one evening as we reviewed the guest list. "She clearly has feelings for you. I see how she looks at you at family gatherings." This was absurd. Jessica had been happily married for 5 years and was expecting her first child. I tried to explain this to Stephanie, but she would not budge. "It is my wedding day too," I argued. "Jessica is family." "If you really loved me, you would understand why this makes me uncomfortable," Stephanie countered, tears forming in her eyes. Do you care more about having your cousin there than my feelings? After 3 days of tense discussions and Stephanie refusing to speak to me, I reluctantly agreed to exclude Jessica from the invitation list. The conversation with my aunt was painful, and I could tell she was hurt and confused. This created tension within my extended family, with several relatives questioning my decision. The financial aspects of the wedding became our next battleground. We had originally discussed a budget of around $15,000 with plans to save the rest of our money for a down payment on a house. But Stephanie began adding elements that pushed our costs higher and higher. $50,000 is actually quite reasonable for a Seattle wedding, she insisted, after showing me her updated spreadsheet, and we deserve the best day possible. When I expressed concern about depleting our savings, Stephanie suggested I take out a personal loan. Your company offers good benefits, right? And you are due for a promotion soon, she reasoned. We can pay it off quickly. Despite my discomfort, I found myself at the bank the following week, applying for a loan that would take years to repay. Each time I expressed hesitation about the mounting costs, Stephanie would remind me that this was a once-in-a-lifetime event and that all her friends had elaborate weddings. The situation worsened when Stephanie began questioning my job. As a software engineer, I occasionally needed to travel for conferences or to meet with clients in other cities. These trips were usually brief, 2 or 3 days at most, but Stephanie grew increasingly anxious about them. I found a job posting at Turner Tech, she mentioned casually one evening. They are looking for someone with your skills, and their office is just 10 minutes from our apartment. No travel required. I was shocked. Stephanie, I love my current position. The team is great, the work is challenging, and there are opportunities for advancement. But once we are married, priorities change, she countered. Family should come first. How will we start trying for children if you are constantly traveling? We had not even discussed having children immediately after marriage, but suddenly this became another point of contention. Stephanie began sending me job listings for local companies, suggesting I should be applying before the wedding. The pressure was constant, and I found myself questioning my career path, despite my satisfaction with it. Perhaps the most painful demand came when Stephanie suggested I distance myself from Thomas. My best friend had organized a bachelor weekend in the mountains, keeping it low-key, as he knew that would be my preference. When Stephanie found out Thomas had planned the trip, she became furious. He has never supported our relationship, she claimed. He is probably planning to bring girls to your party, or talk you out of marrying me. This was untrue and unfair. Thomas had always been respectful of my relationship, even when expressing concerns. He had included activities Stephanie knew I enjoyed, like hiking and fishing, specifically avoiding the typical bachelor party scene. Once we are married, we should surround ourselves with couples who support our relationship, Stephanie continued. Not single guys who want to keep you living like you are still in college. I found myself making excuses to Thomas, canceling our regular meetups and eventually backing out of the bachelor weekend he had thoughtfully planned. The hurt in his voice when I called to cancel was evident, though he tried to hide it. My family and friends began noticing changes in me. My mother called one Sunday, concerned that I had missed our monthly family dinner for the 3rd time in a row. My younger sister commented on how I seemed stressed whenever wedding planning came up in conversation. Even coworkers mentioned that I seemed distracted and less engaged. I tried talking to Stephanie about finding a better balance, about compromising, so we both felt good about our decisions. These conversations inevitably ended with her accusing me of not being committed to our future, of not understanding her needs, or of prioritizing others over her. Each time I would apologize and try harder to meet her expectations, believing this tension would resolve once we were past the stress of wedding planning. 3 months before the wedding date, with most arrangements finalized and deposits paid, I discovered just how wrong I was. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when everything came to a head. I had just returned from work tired after a long day of debugging code and back-to-back meetings. Stephanie was waiting in our living room, wedding magazines spread across the coffee table alongside her laptop open to a Pinterest board labeled Dream Wedding Editions. Clark, I have been thinking, she began as soon as I set down my keys. We really should add the champagne fountain and ice sculpture to the reception. The coordinator says we need to decide this week. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Steph, we are already $10,000 over budget. We agreed no more additions. But these will make such a statement, she insisted. Madison had both at her wedding last year, and people still talk about how elegant it was. We simply cannot afford it, I stated firmly. The loan is already stretching us thin. Stephanie paused, studying me for a moment before speaking again. What about your grandfather's car? You never drive that old Mustang anyway. It just sits in your parents' garage. The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. That 1965 Mustang had been my grandfather's pride and joy. He had taught me to drive in that car, spent weekends showing me how to maintain it, and left it to me when he passed away 5 years ago. It was one of my most treasured possessions, full of memories and sentimental value. That is absolutely not an option, I replied, my voice tense. The car is not for sale, ever. Stephanie's expression hardened. It is just sitting there, depreciating. Being practical about assets is part of marriage, Clark. If you sell it, we could have the perfect wedding, and maybe even extend our honeymoon. No, I said more forcefully this time. That car was my grandfather's legacy to me. It is not a bargaining chip for wedding extras. The argument escalated quickly. Stephanie accused me of caring more about an old piece of metal than our future together. I countered that respecting each other's values and sentiments was essential for a healthy marriage. The discussion grew heated, with Stephanie eventually standing up and crossing her arms. Fine, she said, her voice cold. If you cannot make this sacrifice for our wedding, maybe you are not ready for marriage at all. I stared at her in disbelief. Are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying that if you cannot meet me halfway on these wedding details, if you cannot put my needs first, then perhaps we should reconsider whether this wedding should happen at all. The ultimatum hung in the air between us. I felt a strange mixture of shock, anger, and oddly clarity. Without another word, I grabbed my jacket and keys. Where are you going? Stephanie demanded. To get some air. To think, I replied, already heading for the door. Do not wait up. I drove aimlessly around the city for hours, the wipers beating a steady rhythm against the persistent rain. Eventually, I found myself parked outside my parents' house. It was nearly 11 p.m., but lights were still on downstairs. I sat in the car for several minutes before gathering the courage to go in. My mother took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. My father made coffee, and I found myself pouring out everything at their kitchen table, the same place where I had done homework, celebrated birthdays, and shared countless family meals. I do not know what to do, I concluded, staring into my now cold coffee. I love her, but I feel like I am losing myself trying to make her happy. My father, usually reserved with advice, spoke carefully. Marriage is about compromise, son, but it is also about respect. If you begin a marriage by sacrificing everything important to you, where does it end? My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Only you can decide what is right for you, Clark. But ask yourself if this relationship is bringing out the best in both of you, or the worst. I slept in my old bedroom that night, surrounded by remnants of my younger self basketball trophies and science fair ribbons. In the morning, I went to the garage and sat in my grandfather's Mustang, running my hands over the steering wheel where his had been countless times. By the time I returned to our apartment, I had made my decision. I found Stephanie waiting for me, her eyes red from crying or lack of sleep, possibly both. She rushed toward me as I entered, throwing her arms around my neck. I was so worried, she said, her voice trembling. You did not answer your phone. I thought maybe you had an accident, or that you were not coming back. I gently disentangled myself from her embrace, setting my keys on the entryway table. We need to talk, Stephanie. She nodded, composing herself as we moved to sit on the couch, a careful distance between us. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say during the drive over, trying to be fair but honest. I have been thinking about your ultimatum. I began, maintaining eye contact, despite the difficulty. And about our relationship as a whole. Stephanie's posture stiffened. I was upset last night. I did not mean it as an ultimatum. But it was, I replied quietly. And it is not the first one. Over these past months, I have changed so much of myself trying to meet your expectations. I have distanced myself from friends and family, taken on debt I am uncomfortable with, and considered leaving a job I love, all because you insisted these were requirements for our relationship to work. That is not fair, she protested. I was only trying to build the best future for us. Every couple makes sacrifices. Sacrifices should be mutual, I said, and they should be discussed, not demanded. When was the last time you compromised on something important to me? Stephanie was silent, her eyes darting around as if searching for examples. I care about you deeply, I continued, but I cannot enter a marriage where my feelings, priorities, and connections are consistently devalued. Last night made me realize that this pattern would not end after the wedding. It would only become more entrenched. What are you saying? Stephanie asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. I took a deep breath. I am saying that I cannot marry you under these conditions. I think we need to call off the wedding. The words hung in the air between us. Stephanie's expressions cycled through shock, hurt, and anger in rapid succession. "You cannot be serious," she finally said. "After all our planning, all the money spent, you want to walk away 3 months before the wedding. I would rather face that difficulty now than face a divorce later, or spend years in an unhappy marriage," I replied, my resolve strengthening. As I spoke the truth aloud, what followed was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. Stephanie alternated between tears and accusations, between trying to make me feel guilty and attempting to backtrack on her demands. She promised things would be different after the wedding, that she had only been stressed about planning. "We can postpone instead," she suggested desperately. "Take more time to work through these issues." But in my heart, I knew postponement would only delay the inevitable. The fundamental dynamics between us would not change. When I remained firm in my decision, Stephanie's tactics shifted. "My family has already spent thousands on this wedding," she said, voice hardening. "They will never forgive you. None of our friends will understand. They will all take my side." "I have to be able to live with myself," I responded. "And right now I cannot do that if I continue down this path." The final blow came when Stephanie, realizing she could not change my mind, made a threat that confirmed I was making the right choice. "If you leave me," she said, her voice low and dangerous, "I will make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are. I will tell them you were controlling and abusive, that I was afraid to stay with you." I felt a cold wash of clarity at her words. "I have never been anything but respectful toward you, even when disagreeing. The fact that you would threaten to lie about abuse shows exactly why this relationship needs to end." I left the apartment shortly after, giving Stephanie space and time to process. The next few days were a whirlwind of painful logistics. I stayed temporarily with Thomas, who welcomed me without judgment, or "I told you so" comments. Together we created a plan for notifying guests, canceling vendors, and handling the financial fallout of a canceled wedding. I returned the engagement ring to Stephanie's parents, explaining my decision as respectfully as possible. While her father was coldly angry, her mother surprised me with her response. "Stephanie has always been strong-willed," she said quietly as I was leaving. "Perhaps too much so, sometimes. I hope you both find happiness, even if it is not with each other." Some friends did take sides, as Stephanie had predicted, but many reached out privately to express support, or simply to check on my well-being. My cousin Jessica called as soon as she heard the news. "I never said anything because I wanted to respect your choice," she told me. "But I am relieved, Clark. You deserve someone who loves all of you, not just the parts they can control." The weeks following the breakup were difficult but clarifying. I moved out of our shared apartment into a smaller place closer to my office. I reconnected with friends I had neglected and resumed weekly dinners with my family. One Sunday afternoon, I took my grandfather's Mustang for a long drive along the coast, feeling more like myself than I had in months. A year has passed since I made the decision to end my engagement. The financial consequences were significant. Several $1,000s in non-refundable deposits lost, but the personal growth has been worth every penny. I learned painful but necessary lessons about love versus control, about the difference between compromise and capitulation, and about the courage required to walk away from something that looks right on the surface but feels wrong. Underneath, the first few months were the hardest. Despite knowing I had made the right choice, I questioned myself during lonely evenings. Mutual friends reported that Stephanie had indeed tried to paint me as the villain, though most saw through the inconsistencies in her story. She moved back to Chicago eventually, and we have had no contact since finalizing the division of our shared possessions. Thomas proved to be the friend I had always known him to be, patient and supportive without judgment. We reinstated our Thursday night dinners, and he gradually reintroduced me to social circles I had withdrawn from. 6 months after the breakup, he convinced me to join a community hiking group, where I have made new friends who know me only as I am now, not as half of a former couple. My relationship with my family has deepened. My father and I restored my grandfather's Mustang together, spending weekends in comfortable silence or sharing stories I had forgotten from my childhood. My mother, always insightful, suggested I might benefit from talking to someone professionally about my experience. The therapist helped me recognize patterns I had missed, how my desire to please and avoid conflict had allowed boundaries to be crossed repeatedly. I learned that real love does not require the erasure of self, that healthy relationships expand your world rather than contract it. Perhaps most surprisingly, I received messages from several of Stephanie's friends months after our breakup expressing that they had witnessed concerning behaviors in our relationship but had not known how to address them. One confided that Stephanie had treated previous partners similarly, though none had reached the engagement stage. I have begun dating again recently, cautiously and with clearer boundaries. I am more attentive now to early warning signs, more willing to express my needs and limitations. I have also discovered that the right person will respect these boundaries without resentment or manipulation. Looking back, I realize how close I came to entering a marriage that would have slowly eroded my sense of self. The short-term pain of ending an engagement was intense but finite. The pain of losing myself in an unhealthy relationship would have been ongoing and potentially permanent. For anyone facing a similar situation, questioning whether to continue a relationship that requires constant sacrifice of your authentic self, I encourage you to listen to that quiet voice of doubt. It is often your wisest counsel. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that ultimately led to unexpected freedom? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more personal journeys and lessons learned. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is change direction when we realize we are on the wrong path.